Once again, my friends, this is Noah Fredericks coming to you. This is our tape number 63. It's entitled Sons of the Watchers. Now, I believe that most of you, my faithful listeners, those of you who are either stirred by what you would consider the strange and cheap sensationalism, I don't think so. I think I've weeded most of those out by now. Because when you get into the Bible too heavy, and you defend the New Testament, and the greatest star man that ever was, the one called the Christ, acclaimed as Messiah by a big part of the world, that's where they start dropping off. Because they, like the Von Daniken and all of the other hundreds of UFO books that have been written from the 50s up until the present, and I'm amazed by how many are even flooding the market today, and a lot of them are just plagiaristic rehashes of old, hazunga, as I would call it. So, I believe, let's see, how do I say this humbly? It's not speaking of myself, I'm speaking to you. We find in the New Testament where the star man, as I call the Christ, he said, "Blessed are your eyes, for they see, and blessed are your ears, for they hear." Hear what? The good news, the gospel of salvation, as the sloppy agape churches are teaching it today. Don't get me wrong, I'm not running down the fact that the Almighty came to save us and to restore us to Himself and to His household and to the knowledge of who we were in the deepest, darkest ages of antiquity. I shouldn't phrase it that way. I should say the glorious light-filled days of antiquity prior to our fall, along with a whole lot of other people, which we're referring to as the Sons of the Watchers. Now, I want to tell you something without trying to deal in any kind of cheap sensationalism, but I've had a lot of strange things happen since the starting of these tape series and a lot of printed literature and so forth that we put out to a select few. A funny thing happened, and I will thank the man. We'll just call him Jack on this tape. And Jack, I appreciate you so very much, the favor that you did for me. And the strangest thing of all, I think that I don't think that I'm some sort of absent-minded professor or just absent-minded. But the strange thing is I mailed this man, Jack. He had ordered every one of my tapes and even paid for this album ahead of time. So in my rush, I ran off a copy and I had my wife type some labels up and put on them and sent them off to him. I figure I owed the man that. Well, I got to looking around and I found my album number 11. I was trying to get the recording and the people that print the labels and get it all together, and I was very anxious to get it off to some other people who were inquiring. And so, for some reason or other, my wife picked up and she listened to the third tape in this album, which is 63, and it was blank. She said, "How could this be? This is the master." Well, I inquired of this Jack, the first fellow I sent out to, and he said, "Well, I wondered why you sent me the album that said master on it." He sent it back, and the tape was blank. My other master, they were all blank. And that's not possible, because I see over these things myself. Now, how it all came about, I don't know. I must be very honest with you. I do so many tapes and, doing radio programs, so forth, beside this. I don't even know the contents, basically, of what I put on this. I don't seem to be able to find any notes of points I want to make. Well, so much for that. I'm not trying to deal cheap sensationalism, but I must confess at the outset it's very odd. Anyway, let us continue on. Now, a lot of these people that I've lost a lot of people along the way, but I've picked up others, so that's all right too. But you see, the truth will separate the men from the boys. Now, I would point out to you in the 17th chapter of Acts and verse 22 that may give some light and bearing and substantiate some of these outrageous claims that I have made, where I tried to tell the people the same thing that Christ told John while on the Isle of Patmos, who wrote down the book of Revelations, and referring to the 12th chapter of Revelation, says there was a great war in the heavens. And as we have maintained all along, trying to rehash that Mars and Venus and the moon, and there were several other planets, and we feel that there's a possibility that there was one or two that was totally destroyed and taken clear out of our hemisphere. But anyway, I think that there's a lot of evidence in Scripture that we overlook and we deny and we have not considered before. Now, you remember, let me rehash for a minute, Genesis 3:15. The Almighty said He was going to put enmity between the seed of the woman and the seed of the serpent. Now, as we pointed out and we explained to you, the serpent ships, we know that God's chosen people are depicted as the sheep of His pasture. They're called the saints, the santos, the believing offspring, all of these different things. And so there is an emblem of the people of God are allegorically depicted as Israel. But people deny and don't, and they fail to understand. The Bible talks about the sheep, the goats, the hogs, the dogs, and the serpent. Now, something I don't believe that anybody should destroy any race's history or background or culture, because once those people lose their identity, they've lost who they are and where they've been, so they have no idea where they're supposed to be going. And so I am all for the ethnic background of these different individuals, as long as it doesn't encroach upon this great nation and its founder race, as long as it does not destroy our culture. But, my friends, it is so subtle. It's so sublimably being done every day. There's a movie that was a big hit with the kids. In fact, I enjoyed watching it myself. Karate Kid 1, 2, and I don't know. Those sequels go on. I don't know how many have been made. I haven't followed it quite that closely. But I see in some of these tourist traps in the areas where I live, they have this little plastic package thing. You know, you can throw it away and pollute your environment. And here's a picture of an Anglo-Saxon boy. He can buy one of these Japanese headbands to go around. If you had worn that during the Second World War, the brothers, uncles, mothers, and fathers of the people who were over there fighting this fierce, terrible battle in which so many tens of thousands of our men perished in fighting, the sons of Nippon, as they called themselves, those whose flag was the land of the rising sun. And you remember, I think that we've pointed out quite thoroughly that Cain referred to himself as the sun god. And so this is the symbol of Japan, Ya-Pan, goat god. Now, I am not saying that all Japanese people racially are evil. But we pointed out that Jack London, many, many years, way before the Second World War, he came back to America after having followed quite closely the war in China, and he came back and he told of his personal experience with a Japanese officer there. This was a matter of record that can be looked up and researched on your part if you care to. And this Nippon officer, who was a cultured, brilliant man, sat down and told Jack London, he says, "Now, Jack, I've been a fan of yours, read every one of your books, I enjoy them." And he says, "I want you to know that we are the master race, that we are the people that are going to conquer this whole earth. Once we conquered Asia, then we're coming against the Americas and white Anglo-Saxon Europe, and we're going to capture you also. And so, you see, we have a vying for this world, this planet. And so there is a continuous war, and the Bible talks about the sheep, the goats, the hogs, the dogs, and the serpent people. And so our cowardly or wimpy, sloppy agape full of love and bleeding hearts, and, well, we'll leave it at that, they will not recognize or look into the truth or the possibility of these things, which goes back before recorded history and time, where our progenitors tried to pass it on down to us. And so I'm just one little voice crying in the wilderness? No, I'm not the only one. There's others out there that are trying to turn you back from whence you came and why you're here and what you're supposed to be doing and what you might inherit one day if you are able to conquer and overcome this world and its evil influence upon you. So we find in verse 22 of Acts 17, then Paul stood in the midst of Mars Hill and said, O ye men of Athens, I perceive that in all things you are too superstitious. For as I passed by and beheld your devotion, I found an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God, whom therefore ye ignorantly worship him, declare I unto you, etc., and so on. You can go look up the rest of it. I don't think they were as ignorant as Paul perceived them to be. You can call him Baal. You can call him the Great Khan. You can call him Cain. You can call him Beelzebub. Just like the Almighty Yahweh has many different names, and a lot of those names describe his power and his love and his generosity and his ability and his deeds and so forth. So if you would allow me for one moment here, let me look at the James Moffat. Now, you remember, well, first of all, before we go to that, let's refresh ourselves here on a couple points. Esau have I hated, and Jacob have I loved, said the Almighty. Esau's name, because he was treasonous. He took these strange Canaanite women, along with some other strange women, which if you'll look it up in your Strong's Concordance in the Hebrew, meaning not of your race. Now, Israel was to remain segregated. All you have to do is read the laws of Leviticus and Deuteronomy, and it's quite explicit. And Deuteronomy, I believe it's around the 7th chapter, says, Before thee I placed 7 nations mightier and greater than you, the Hittites, Girgashites, Amorites, Hivites, Jebusites, Perizzites, Canaanites. And he didn't say to have a détente with them. He said, Do not take their daughters unto thy sons, or give your sons unto their daughters, for they shall lead you away to strange gods. In other words, just like breeding Irish setters or German shepherds, when you go crossbreeding, you weaken those genes, you mess them up. And so here's the dogs having a genetical characteristic of each of the different specific breeds that were bred for a specific purpose, and then they're confused. They don't know how to react. And so you find this in human beings. I think a lot of this is why we have mental breakdowns and emotional problems, and our asylums are full of people. But anyway, so we pointed out, Esau have I hated, and Jacob have I loved, and he took these daughters of Cain, or the Great Khan. Later on, we told you in China they're called Genghis Khan, Bulbus Khan, and we go to India, and they spoke of the Great Khans and the Sargon the Great and the Sargon the Magnificent and so forth. And these are historical facts. They're secular. They're not just some wild-eyed religious fanatics idea. But people don't realize, and then recapping for just an instant now, we go back to the Greeks. And they called Mars the Red Planet. They called it the God of War. And so, you see, it was changed, which seemed to be a historical fact and a mythological fact, but I have maintained for many ages, and And listen, friends, there's thousands of people out there now in the light of this new scientific age and rocketry and so forth, and they look all about them and they say, my, maybe there is something to these ancient tales of the Greeks and the Macedonians and the Akkadians and the Babylonians, the Egyptians and the ancient Hebrews, excuse me, and the tales in the Nag Hammadi and the Mahabharata and the tales and the stories carried over from the Eskimos to the Indians of Central and South Americas. So yes, my friends, we, the Anglo-Saxon white man, who I believe to be the descendant of the Adamic man, I think that he's responsible for all of the troubles in the world because he has not assumed his responsibility that the Almighty has given him. But anyway, regardless of all of that, we talk about the serpent ships, the serpent people, as they were called, who came from worlds beyond in those strange unknown ships. And you've heard me speak of Pegasus from Greek mythology, and we find out as we went back to a language more ancient than the terribly sorry. We go to a language more ancient than that, and we went back to the word Suze, and which meant an iron ship, and we explained all that in our earlier tapes. It means to stretch out like at the speed of light, to go a great distance. And so we find that the Greeks know Pega and Pegasus and so forth. Now allow me to read from the James Moffat. So Paul stood in the middle of the Arpegos and said, Men of Athens, I observe at every turn that you're a most religious people. That didn't mean they give a dang about God Almighty Yahweh. He said, Why, as I passed along and I scanned your objects of worship, I actually came upon an altar with the unknown inscription to an unknown God. Well, anyway, he goes on, he says, Well, I proclaim to you what you worship in your ignorance, the God who made the world and all the things in it. He, as Lord of the heavens and earth, does not dwell in shrines that are made by human hands, and he is not served by human hands, and etc., and so on. And you can go on, and you can read it for yourself. Now, I think a most amazing thing is we go back, and naturally you go back to Noah when he was born. And as I have maintained, I know that this sounds so squirrely to a lot of people, but these same people that will ridicule me, they will not debate me, they will not sit down and reason with me, they will not research with me, and they have not researched on their own. And so they fail to understand, as I've said before, the ancient idioms and the etymology of the language. And so every now and then I have to go back to some of the very basics and give them a little Bible study, and also using from secular history, proving that there were ancient Taurogs and Turanians and Bactrians and ancient people long before this Anglo-Saxon man, or this Adamic man, this Aryan man, this Semitic man. They all mean basically the same thing. Before he ever appeared upon this earth, and I'm going to give a little bit longer period, I say approximately 7,500 years ago, and this is why Christ was called the second Adam, because the first Adam, the first of his kind that he sent here, they capitulated with the adversary because he had already had a system established in a world empire, and he had total control of this world. And then here were these Johnny-come-lately, these Adamites, who brought the knowledge from the very throne of the Almighty. And he gave the adversary, Satan, if you like, or devil, he and his people gave him an opportunity to recant, to repent. Just a very simple, I'm sorry, excuse me, forgive me, give me another chance. And to surrender their life and soul and all to the Almighty, and they could be restored to the worlds from whence they came. But no, they would not do that. You know, I find it most amazing that across my desk every day some of the great abundance of material that comes, and some of it by its title that gets me all excited. I have one here that's entitled Invaded by Hordes from Another World. And I believe the man is, well, I don't know that he is a pastor. At least he doesn't put his title or doctrine on there. I'm not sure whether he had a radio program or not, but I got all excited about it. I thought, my goodness, here's somebody else that knows what I know, and he doesn't use these gregarious pictures of spaceships shooting each other down. But I read through the whole thing, and there's nothing to do with invading hordes from another world. And then I have another book that a friend of mine that sent me. It's out of print now. It's A Cosmic Conspiracy. And he goes into great detail about these people that come from other worlds. Is first printed in 1978, reprinted many times up until 1988. And then he turned around and he did a sequel to it, much of what I agree and some that I don't. But a lot of very interesting material. But you see, let's go back basic for just a minute. A lot of people, they get all full of mental indigestion when you try to tell them that they have failed to understand, which I did for many years, till the thought crossed my mind because I had been in so many debates on the book of Genesis. And I had pointed out that a day with the Almighty, it meant age, eon, or time period in this instance, and it talks about how the Elohim, which is plural for gods. And some of the older renditions says, and the gods created the heavens and the earth by the vibrations. In other words, this is getting into, well, I could drag out books on it. We could talk about parallel worlds and parallel existence and coexistence as worlds within worlds, and a lot of things that just would blow our bubble. But it seems that scientists have written on it. There's some honest, open-minded scientists that believe that these things are really true, but I think so much of it is overlooked and misunderstood by the scientists and all of these brilliant people that know how to use all these fantastic computers. And if they would feed all of this ancient knowledge into it, they could come up very quickly with some answers as to where they come and why they're here. And then they could forget this Big Bang stupidity. They could forget the evolution hogwash and know that they no weatherman came from a monkey. I think a lot of them came from jackasses. And they're probably going to bray like a jackass in a pepper patch when they hear this. But what about Adam? Was he the first man? No, my friends, there's a lot of people who become total agnostics because of this supposed conflict between the Bible and science. Fact and truth, my dear friends, there's no conflict at all between a correct translation of the Bible and really proven science. They're not just unproven theories. One of those who suppose that conflicts is between the fact that science knows that man and beings have been living on this earth far longer than the few thousand years that appears to be covered by the Bible. And the common belief in the Bible, it says that Adam was the first man. But the truth is, my dear friends, that this Bible nowhere says that Adam was the first man. Yes, I know what most of your preachers say, and I know this may give you mental indigestion. It's hard on your little male ego, because just like myself, it's diametrically opposed to everything that I'd been taught. I didn't say that I believed, but I had to accept it till something else came along. But the Bible doesn't say that he was. It merely says that Adam was the first white man. Oh, let's look at the records here. The many mistranslations. In the King James Version, observe much of the truth. For example, in Genesis 1 and verses 1 to 2, in the beginning it said God created the heaven and the earth. The earth was out form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Now, as we look to the Hebrew, it said the earth had become chaotic and empty. All right. Now, my friends, keep this in mind. We just assume. You know what they say when you assume something? ASS, you, M-E, you make an ass out of you and me. Because, remember, if there is a great, intelligent, almighty Yahweh, God that's eternal, and He is that all-powerful deity and personage, and this that we fail to understand, that's spoken of in Scripture, why in the world would He put just us bunch of little pinheads on this one planet and leave all these other worlds and galaxies and sidereal systems that seem to be without end? When prophecies throughout the Bible said He was going to make us like the dust of the earth, and He was going to make us like the sands of the sea, and like the stars of the heaven, there would be no end to the increase of the very family of the Almighty. My friend, He's got you here on like a sharecropper in another galaxy, possibly, as we've pointed out, where you were brought from probably somewhere in deep space. And we're ever expanding the Father's heaven and His universe and moving out farther and farther into the galaxies, and where one day it says we don't know what we will be like, but we know that we shall be like Him even as He is. And it said when the Virgin Mary gave birth to this Christ, go get your concordance out, you look it up. It said He was merely a sign of many brethren, many to come, that will grow into the fullness of Him. But anyway, so as I said in the Hebrew, it says how the earth had become chaotic and it was empty. We would cite to you to go look at Rotherham's emphasized Bible. That is in some early catastrophe that had wrecked a world, which was not without form and void before that. There was a judgment that took place of God Almighty, Yahweh, if you like, on an earlier civilization for their wickedness. And as we go to Jeremiah 4:23 to 27, it gives a vision of this. He said, I beheld. Now look, here's what I'm saying. The Bible interprets the Bible. Jeremiah went back and he took the very second verse of Scripture. Now listen, he tells you what went on there because, my friend, I'm going to be straight with you. I would never, ever understood that. But I say that Jeremiah, like so many other, had first-hand information given to him by extraterrestrial messengers, as it says in the Hebrew. Now, if you want to call them by the Greek angels and whatever. But he had some first-hand information, and did he not have access to ancient scrolls that are long lost to this civilization? Now, he said, Jeremiah, he quotes here the second verse of Genesis. And I beheld the earth, and lo, it was without form and void, and the heavens, they had no light, and I beheld the mountains, and lo, they trembled, and all the hills moved lightly, and I beheld, and lo, there was no man, all the birds of the heavens were fled, and I beheld, lo, the fruitful place was a wilderness, and all, now get this, and all of the cities thereof were broken down at the presence of the Lord and of His fierce anger. For thus hath the Lord said, the whole land shall be desolate, yet I will not make a full end. Therefore He did not, we do not find buried cities older than Adam, and skeletons that can be dated by the carbon-14 process of many thousands of years earlier. But the Bible itself tells us about this. But, my friends, as I went along, and as I told you, if you do not have one, you should get one. These fantastic Farrar Fenton Bibles. It tells us in there in the first 10 pages of Genesis, he puts in his footnotes, and he talked about the cities of Adam. He talked about the cities of Eve. And as I pointed out in some of my other series of tapes, how the ancient Chinese astronomers, they allegorically referred to the trees of heaven. They said, we're the wood of the trees. They talked about the family trees. And they and many of the other ancients, as I quoted from the Nag Hammadi and the Mahabharata and some of these others, they talk about the great cities of heaven. They're talking about worlds. But you see, If you have a mindset and you're not willing to let go of that, if you're not willing to expand your mind and keep an open mind, my friends, I'm not so arrogant to say that I'm right, but just allow me the privilege of the probability that this is true. Now, let's go back and we talk about these ancient peoples. As you've heard me tell you before, you go to the caves of Kilimanjaro in Africa and they dig up the bones of the Negroid race going back over 75,000 years ago. You go to Chicken Bone Hill in China and you dig up the bones of the Chinese that they trace back, radiocarbon tests and so forth, going back over 1.5 million years ago. Now, if like these preachers have wondered why there's a lack of intelligent people. I'm not saying you're ignorant if you go to church, but what I'm saying, if they're wondering why there's not a lot of scientists and engineers and scholarly people coming to their church, it's not because they're atheists, but they know darn well that one family, Ham and his wife and his kiddies, could breed the black, the yellow, and the red, and the white man, and all these different and sundry races. I've told these people that I call this sexual roulette. And if I really believed that, I would quit having children with my wife, because my neighbors would start to wonder if I had a little black child, and then I had a little India-looking child, and I had a yellow one, and oh, come on, let's be reasonable. So as I said, the Bible tells about pre-Adamic ancient people who came, I believe, beyond a shadow of a doubt. They have it in their history that came from beyond the stars, and they were dwelling here, and some of their progenitors and their neighbors of those worlds out there that came to visit them and brought them science and technology. And I believe beyond a shadow of a doubt the ancient cities of Egypt and Babylon, that they were set up by intelligence beyond our comprehension today, who came from beyond the stars. Now, next we find that the Bible, it tells of the creation of man. And I told you many times, like I say, when he created the whale, it said that it meant dispatched. My friends, they were dispatched from somewhere among the stars. They were the priming of the pump. They were planning a handful or maybe great colonies of these people upon this outreach, shall we say, this outback, this oasis in space, to set up sharecroppers. Next, the Bible tells us of the creation of man in the plural in Genesis 1:26-28, saying, male and female created he them. Is that not plural? 1:27, and then God told his people, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. Genesis 1:28. My friends, how do you replenish something unless it was there before? Talking about destructions of worlds. Plenish is an obsolete English word, my friends, meaning to fill. And you cannot replenish when there's never been plenished or filled before. Now, in the next chapter of Genesis 2, we find that this Adam, in the singular, created the Hebrew word Adon. A-W-D-A-W-N. Rendered Adam in English is from a root word meaning to show blood in the face or of a ruddy complexion, a word obviously not applicable to the darker races, which we know from scientific evidence to be much older than the white race, at least here on this earth. Now, when these jerks get up in my face and say, aren't you a racist? I said, yes, I am part of a race. Well, aren't you anti-Semitic? I said, no, jerk, I'm a Semitic man. How can I be anti-white? How can I be anti-self? I am for the perpetuation of my race and any of these other races, as long as they don't try to destroy mine, which they're doing very rapidly, invoking their culture, as they call it, on us, and their music and their way of thinking. The Almighty said, I gave you the heathen as an inheritance. Take them and rule over them with righteousness. Righteousness means the law. Now I ask you, dear friends, who in God's name is the heathen? Now, before I get off on a wild woolly tangent here, we find that biblical scholars know that Genesis 3:20, and Adam called his wife, called her name Eve because it says she was the mother of all living. Now, that was of a much later interpolation because we do not find it in earlier manuscripts. We would cite to you to check out Moffat translation. And while you're in the Moffat, we would remind you that these people that were kicked out of a world, and I'm talking about did not happen on this world, for sure. And he drove, this is 324 of Moffat, he drove the man out and he set cherubs at the east of the Park of Eden, with the blade of a sword flashing in every direction to guard the path to the tree of life. We pointed out what the tree of life and the house of life, and we pointed out the fact that these ancient translators, they were not familiar with, or they were afraid to, or so ignorant, they couldn't understand what these cherub ships were. We pointed this out in earlier things. And it appeared only that they were like a flashing sword that was rotating. Now, let us continue here. We find then, when we go to, we ought to take a look here at the 4th chapter of Genesis as it records the, this is where it gets confusing. Many of my dear friends, and shall we say my mentors, men at whom I sat at the feet in great awe, and the thrill that permeated my whole body, I do not have the vocabulary to describe the joy that I felt as I received the knowledge from men that are now deceased, great teachers. But they were not conversant in the ancient idioms and the symbolism and the etymology. But you see, I am where I am today because I stood, using the old vernacular, I stood on the shoulders of great men who went before me and established these eternal truths and brought it to my mind to where I can understand what I do today. So this is nothing disparaging about them, because I hope and I pray to God that somewhere on this earth that there's at least one man or one woman that my teachings have had an effect upon, that it might help carry our people back to truth, that they might regain that which they lost ages and eons ago in outer space. But we find here that people fail to understand, like the 4th chapter of Genesis, as it records the birth of Cain and Abel, and we find the Hebrew wording suggests that they were twins. Now we find no other child of Eve is mentioned now until the birth of Seth. You remember how I pointed out to you how the Egyptians, under their god and most loved Horus, we found the evidence of this written in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, where they fought against the evil Seth, who came in the Shub ships. All right, we find in the book of Genesis, we talked about the serpent ships, and later on we talked about the Sioux ships. And so, naturally, we find the Egyptians, who are a much older and pre-established race. Now, we've argued over it, and I have opinions, and I must confess, hot and cold, I switch back and forth, and I have to admit that I'm confused. Who was this Osiris? And I think that we've established who Cain was, and that he was Horus, and he was the son of a great Khan. Now, we find in astronomy, they talk about the twins. They talk about the scales. My friend, I have to confess to you There's a great deal there that I don't understand. But as I have pointed out before, what my mentors and my predecessors did not understand even in their wildest dreams, that symbolically there, calling them twins, all right, this Eve. Let me go back and recap a little bit of our history. We said that Eve, where a lot of people had thought it was Kava, the wife of Yahweh. Well, I've heard it all, my friends, but also we pointed out in our research and tapes past that we're talking about a life container, a great space station, a great satellite, because they cannot see that it's a satellite, because as we pointed out, Venus, which we've gone through all the Greek mythology, we've gone through how all the Indians of Central and South America venerated this Venus, and they knew it was the throne of the gods, and they've understood this, where the dumb white man, he's become, not all, that's why we're still talking or bothered to, but most of them have become such a sickening, pacifistic people that are trying to placate all of these other people, so they don't have any cries of, hey, hate monger, you're anti-Semitic, and all this other hogwash. And don't get me wrong, I'm not down on the other races, but I'm not going to give you any of this hogwash. Some of my best friends are colored, because I happen to live in an area where there aren't any of them. And I don't even like very many white people with the attitude they got today, so I don't go out and about seeking any new friends. I'm trying to get my household, my people, my very own family in order before I go over and tell the colored people how to live, because I think I'd be a hypocrite if I did. But anyway, let's watch out now. We're going to be off preaching. So I believe, where it's talking about born, came out of, that's kave. If I am correct, like Job said, I came forth from the bosom of the Father. In other words, he was trying to tell you that he was genetically related, spiritually, physically, and mentally. He was related to and part of the family of this ancient, we'll call him Yahweh, called Ra by the Egyptians. They knew that there was only one God, but they called all the different sons, the lesser gods, called them gods, and so did the Greeks, and they got so carried away with all them they forgot who the Father was. But, you see, my friends, then, like Job went on to say, I came forth from the bosom of the Father and the womb of the morning, the great morning star, as we have pointed out. That great, beyond, hey, here we are, we're talking about our space stations that we're putting up, and oh my, it can house like 20 people for, such a very long time. And I turn around and I say, hey, the Bible shows you historically and scientifically, and even the primitive Indians of the Americas and all of the cultures of the ancient world point to it. The Egyptians talk about it, and all the evidence is right there of this great mysterious space station who's gone into orbit around our sun, and history says has been missing upon occasion, sometimes for a couple of centuries. Why is that? Is that not possible that they're, these people call themselves a Christian scientist, say, all right, I'd like to share some science with you. Did you know that you had some progenitors who came from deep space, and a great satellite space station that the New Testament tells you had 12 floors, that they came in it and came to circle around our sun so that they might populate the planets we're here? And did you know that there was a great war then that almost destroyed them and left Mars, Edom, the house of Edom, left the very homestead of Cain? Was that the world? Was that the field? Where was that Cain met his brother Abel in the field? You see, the ancient field of battle is where he met him. Now at this time, my friends, I think we better turn our tape over to the other side, and we will continue with our pontificating, and hopefully it will amount to us gaining new knowledge. I don't want anybody's mind to get fuzzed over, but I think if you've gone through this many tapes, you're either crazy as I am, or you think there's a possibility of some validity to it. So we go back. I tell you what, my friends, if you have to be going through the bookstore and you run into a book in the UFO section that's entitled The Home of the Gods by Andrew Thomas. He was also the author of We Are Not the First. And I would cite to you from around pages 37, 38, and 39, you find a lot of interesting things that he talks about. Well, this chapter 2, he speaks of the Exodus. And he talks about in mythology and the ancient writings, he showed in the last days of Atlantis that it was virtually a great doomsday. And he talked and gave us a fearful description of mountain-like waves, from the oceans, hurricanes, volcanic explosions all over the planet and so forth. But see, he got it part right. But I wonder if the man ever considered that it was something that took place that involved a war with great atomic warfare and hydrogen and atomic and whatever and lasers, which threw all of nature out of balance, causing great catalytic upheavals. These things were caused by what? And we've already been through the thing where we know and we acknowledge of some of my mentors and my predecessors that talked about the great flood that took place in the upper Tarim Basin in the Han Mountains of China. And we talked about in the days of Khufu and all of these other historical facts that we cite to. And a lot of people, they try to relate it to Noah. But we find that this man also that we're speaking of in this booklet, he goes back and he speaks of the Sumerian tablets of Gilgamesh, when he speaks of the great primeval ancestors of humanity, and he later thinks it was derived, or the biblical account of Noah appears to be a later version, he says, of the same story. But as I have pointed out before, a lot of people get all bent out of shape when I tell them that there's something very, very wrong with the Genesis account of the flood. They can't believe that there was any sort of evil translators that got in there to subvert it and pervert it. And then we go in and he points out to us in the Zendavestas of Iran, we find another rendering of the flood legend. Yemen, a Persian patriarch who was ordered by the god Hura Mazda to prepare for a world accordingly. Yema, Y-I-M-A, I may be pronouncing it right. He constructed a cave where all the plants and everything were to dwell and so forth. But, you see, whether we go along with that and we talk about here, and then later on, the next page, 38, he goes in, he starts talking about the escape from the doomed land of Atlantis, which was affected by some type of great aircraft. Well, now, if this was a worldwide flood, as he seems to go along with that theory, and it was pointed out before, what's the point of getting into the airplane if this is truly your ark? And I would say to you, you go back and you read that King James version, and you read the account there. It talks about this ark, and it says how it was lifted up between the heaven and the earth. Why didn't he say the Almighty started to float by boat? Why did he say it was lifted up between the heaven and the earth, and he didn't say it was the water? No, we have assumed that. We have assumed it. Now, so we find here that I think we pointed this out to you once before, that the Aborigines in the Northern Territory of Australia, they have a tale of the flood and of the ancient thing that took place. And they talked about the birdmen and the Karan, the chief. He was given wings to ark. And we could go on with all kinds of things. And then we find out that we go back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, who, as I pointed out, I think he was a great possibility that he was Cain, or he was one of the great Khans of the heavens who went back to the very household, went back to this space station, as the Egyptians called it, the house of life. He went back there so that he might regain and seek immortality. It didn't say that he went back to apologize or to repent of his evil deeds or his progenitors. He just went back, like a lot of people that come to my door. And they say, we think you're on the right track, and we think that you're going to run across the secret to eternal life and immortality. If you do, let us know. Even had some of them say, think of the money we could make. Good Lord. So we would point out to you, go back to the ancient Epic of Gilgamesh, and he painted that great dramatic picture of the days of antiquity there, when there was a great interplanetary disaster, and he said, from the foundations of heaven a great black cloud arose, and all that is bright is turned into darkness, and the brother seeketh his brother no more. Now, stop and think. I'm pausing right in the middle of his ancient writing here, and I would cite to you, as we have cited to you before, well, forgive that, but you go back and you look where I tried to point out about Job, that he was not just an individual, but he was talking about people. It talked about his sons. It talked about his seed, his offspring, his kinsmen, and where this messenger came back, and he reported into him that fire came out of heaven and destroyed this particular son. In other words, I say and maintain that it was pointing to, allegorically and idiomatically, it was talking about a great planet that went through destruction. And here we are, and it's repeated by Gilgamesh, and maybe this is just all coincidental. And it says, the brother seeketh his brother no more, and the folk of the sky can no longer recognize each other. The gods feared the flood. They fled, and they climbed into the heavens of Anu. Climbed into heavens. Climbed in what? Are we going to go back to this old archaic, dark age religiosity, talking about the angels of heaven? One minute they got pictures of them with wings on their back, but if they get tired, they got a ladder that goes up to heaven where God is hiding out. But anyway, and so our question is, who are these folks of the sky? Who are these gods fearing the flood and finding the refuge in the heaven? If they were ethereal beings, why would they have been terrified by all these fiery elements? It appears these sky people were none other than, this man maintains, and he believes, they were the Atlantean leaders. But my friend, this is where the confusion comes in. This flood was a long time before. I believe that chronologically this Bible is a mess. And we hear all of these people talk about the pre-diluvian days. You see, those who were the rulers of the pre-diluvian days were nothing more than civil servants, my friends. and then the knowledge and the history of them and the descendants of them, and they came to this earth, and we find all along before the Aswan Dam was built, we found the foolish Europeans and Americans, they were digging like crazy to remove these gods before the great Lord of the North, talking about Russia, come in and flooded them with this stupid Aswan Dam that he put in there, fulfilling scriptures of, let's see, let me find it and read it for you here. Well, anyway, my friends, I've got too much to say here, so I'll just quote to you. Go back and you read that Isaiah, the 19th chapter. This is a wonderful thing, because I noticed it one day when I was giving a talk on the 18th chapter, and it goes into proof of America and who it is, and but anyway, what it is, it's a prophecy fulfilled there in your lifetime. If you're in your 40s or 50s there, well, in other words, these gods were to be moved out of their place. Now, these gods, they were nothing but a bunch of jerks that were tyrannical government rulers on the other side of the flood, before this great climatic war of space. And so we moved some of it to America and to the British Museum, and some of it to the Cairo Museum, and so forth. So there you see where these gods of heaven were moved out. Now, the point is, I would, before I get short on tape, because there's so much I want to say, and I can't do a follow-up, a sequel on this, because I've had to go back and redo this. All right, so we find that the ancient commentary to the book is not quite clear about the manner in which the Exodus was carried out in the so-called Atlantis. But, my friends, this proves beyond the shadow of a doubt that this Atlantis, this is hogwash. It talks about the great king of the dazzling face, the leader of the enlightened in Atlantis. Well, let me go back here. The book of Dizan that was received by Helen Blavatsky, she supposedly got this from this great Himalayan hermitage about 100 years ago, and it may be the lost page from the history of mankind. And it talks about the first great waters came. They swallowed the 7 great lands. All holy save the unholy destroyed. Now the 7 lands. Now you see, my friend, there is the key that these people and this author here, they've misunderstood and they overlooked. Now I don't put very much stock by that vile, degenerate woman, Madame Blavatsky. Well, I won't get into all the proof as to why, but she was a big, robust, chain-smoking woman. And she was diametrically opposed to the Christ and Christendom. And, well, I am too, the pseudo-Christianity of this world, because the real McCoy hasn't been brought forth by very many people, and you don't see it out here in these houses of the Lord, as they call themselves. But you see, the word here, it talks about the 7 great lands. And you remember I pointed out to you before what Christ said in the book of Revelation. He said, I hold the what? The 7 stars, the 7 worlds in my right hand. And so the word land comes from the word erats, meaning that world or that land or that area. So, you see, they had a great discovery right here, because later on, we find all these different people that's writing these books about the faces on Mars, commemorated to this great ancient evil one who called himself a god. You see, a lot of people read, but they don't understand what they read. So we've had all of these religious denominations, and I've listened to all of them, and where they tell me that the Garden of Eden is here on the earth, but I say they don't understand what the Kadubs are, and how this Cain and the survivors of this great intergalactic war, because We read there, if you choose to believe some of these ancient accounts that talks about how the gods, or the sons of God, Elohim as the Christians call them, they took to the space, to the sky, and it talks about how that whole world was destroyed through black clouds, atomic power, and tidal waves, and earthquakes, and all these different things that allegorically is called by and referred to as a flood. Now let's go back. We were discussing the 4th chapter of Genesis, and it records what appears to be the birth of Cain and Abel. Was it establishing 2 new worlds, and then they went to war with each other? We find the wording here suggests, I said, that they were twins, and it appeared that there was no other child born. There's a mystery here, and I got to confess, there's some things here that I don't understand that I used to think that I understood. And so we find that nobody was born before the birth of Cain and Abel, which most scholars say was over 100 years earlier. But when Cain slew Abel in punishment, he said, let's see, what did he say here? He said, and in punishment he was driven out of the land, and he complained to this God or some great Lord of space that anyone that findeth me shall slay me. We find this in Genesis 14:4. Now, a lot of people say mark on Cain. I asked myself, did you ever go look that up? In other words, he was afraid. Everybody knew who he was. There must have been some wanted posters out. So did the Almighty truly put him on another earth, another planet? So, you see, you go back in your accounts, talked about how he was driven off. I said driven off before, in what? He was driven off the face of the earth. And so we find that Cain, wherever he was driven to, going before 17, records that Cain not only married a wife, but it talks about he built a great city. And if my assumption, and going by what the ancient Hebrews and the Babylonians and the Chinese talked about, he built a great city. In other words, friends, he didn't just build a city, he took control of this world. That's right. He is the very one, and his descendants, that when Christ went to him, he said he took them up on a very high mount, and he showed them in an instance all of the cities of this world, and said, if you will bow down, in other words, if you'll work for me and be my subordinate, I will put you at the head of all of this. So, you see there, my friends, it's much greater than religiosity ever thought it to be. So we find the Garden of Eden was not a plantation of just ordinary trees and shrubs. The Almighty never did anything so foolish as to make a special creation just to have a man go in there with shovels and hoes and pruning shears, when he already had millions and millions of the pre-Adamic people that were available for that work. We're told that the Garden of Eden, it contained the tree of knowledge, or experience, as some say, of good and evil. No tree of the forest has any knowledge or any kind of experience of either good or evil. Now we find Ezekiel 31 says, and behold, the Assyrian was a cedar in Lebanon with fair branches and shadowing boughs of a high stature, and he had a height that was exalted above all of the trees of the field or the forest, allegorically, and therefore his height was exalted above all of the trees. A cedar in Lebanon with fair branches and shadowing boughs of a high stature. Therefore his height was exalted above all of the trees of the field, or that world. You get it? And his boughs were multiplied, and his branches became long, and all the fowls of the air, or fowls of heaven, made their nest in his boughs. The fowls of the air. You remember the Indians talked about the thunderbirds, the iron thunderbirds. So you see, allegorically, the bird people, the sky people, idiomatically, the people who could fly. They sat very high up in his government, paid him special visitations, and told him how to rule that ancient Assyrian empire and how to control this world with their guidance and protection. Now, were these bird people that we would call them, or the sons of the watchers as they were called. Now I won't go back and quote chapter and verse and all of these, but you go back in Daniel and all those, and it talked about the watchers and how they were anxious to be off, and some great lord over them said, all right, that's all right, if you got duties to do and things to take care of, go ahead and take off. Now, so we see allegorically here where all the fowls of the heaven made their nests in his boughs, and under his branches did all of the beasts of the field bring forth their young. In other words, they felt security and safe. Hey, he was the sole security of his day, and under his shadow dwelt all great nations, and the cedars in the garden of God did not hide the fir trees like his boughs, and the chestnut trees were not like his branches, nor any tree in the garden of God was likened unto him and unto his beauty. And I have made him fair by the multitude of his branches, so that all trees of Eden that were in the garden of God envied him. My friends, a lot of people think this is all taking place here on this earth. What did that say? All of the people who were in the garden of God envied him. I think we've pointed out over and over how the closed, narrow mind of religiosity has misunderstood the great enormity of that statement of the garden of God. And, pardon me, he speaks of the trees of that garden. And we showed you that trees were many, many planets. But then, well, go back and read Job again. There's party time, intergalactic party hardy. There was envy, there was sensuality. And go back and read the 14th chapter of Isaiah. Didn't it? It talked about this guy that was kicked out of the garden. You see? He was kicked out of Lucifer. He was kicked out of a bright star. He was kicked out of the brightest star, the headquarters of heaven, because of his greed and promiscuity. And it talks about how he had been made wealthy with the abundance of things that he stole from all over the universe. Same as today, only they did it on a grand scale. These guys today are a bunch of pikers. You see, it breaks down, my friends, into two people, the selfish and the unselfish. But there's more selfish than unselfish. And there are those that don't even know that they're selfish. That's sad. But anyway, so we find, obviously, the trees in the garden of God of Eden. We're talking about different family trees of races and nations who admired and envied the early Assyrian empires. These made up the garden that Adam was to cultivate. In other words, to cultivate a person, to refine them. We used to send our fair daughters to finishing school so that they come out cultured and like they had some cultivation. As the old expression my mother used to use, she said, that poor family, their children, they're like the weeds. They were not raised up. They were not cultivated. They just growed up, using the slang, vulgar English. They growed up like weeds without any culture, attendance, or cultivating. Then we go on. That is, Satan had been what we might call the superintendent of the whole planet, to rule it in obedience to God's will until he forfeited his position by rebelling against the Almighty. Now Adam was sent to take his place. So this Adam kind invaded this world. Did they possibly invade other worlds? Because we can't comprehend what we're supposed to do here. So why worry about something else out here? But we find, reading very carefully, it was Adam's job. He was to rule the various nations and races of this world and to represent the Almighty here, educating them in God's laws. But now today, in this so-called enlightened age, notice how the Bible's fulfilled. They said they'd teach evil for good and good for evil. And these damnable heretic preachers are saying we're not under the God's law. This is true. This is why we have chaos throughout this whole world. But our progenitors, they were told to teach these people God's laws and enforcing obedience to these laws. There are other races and nations that have been here long before the Adam kind. Therefore, the Bible makes it unmistakably clear that we're not all descended from Adam and Eve. For there's other races on the earth already old and already numerous when Adam was created or transported or dispatched to this earth. Now, among these other races, there are several who are simply pre-Adamic, and one is at least which is satanic. Now, if you'll read the 3rd chapter of Genesis, I believe that you'll notice that immediately after the fall of Adam, when the Almighty when God required them to answer what they had done, God condemned Satan. The word mistranslated serpent here, and the Hebrew was Nakash, which literally means enchanter or magician. And no doubt, Satan still possessing angelic powers, he was able to be an enchanter or a magician. That is certain that this was the one that seduced Eve. That is no merely some scaly, wriggling snake as they depict in our churchianity, but yes, I would say seduced Eve. That is what she admitted to in the original Hebrew. That they took them into the very household of the Almighty, and they start to cohabitate with these people, like we find that the Adamic people, now called Israelites in Deuteronomy, and the 7th chapter was warned not to do this, that they would be bred out of existence, that they were a special bred people, that they were genetically coded for a hierarchy throughout not only this world but the universe. Yes, I said seduce, the sons of seduction. The Bible used the word beget with monotonous regularity. For the first time the Bible ever says that Adam was begot anyone was Genesis 5:3, when it says, "And Adam lived 130 years and begot a son in his own likeness after his image, and called his name Seth." But you go back to Genesis 3:15, the Almighty said to Satan, "I'm going to put enmity between you and the woman, between thy seed and her seed." The same Hebrew word for seed is used in both cases. Satan was to have just a literal seed as the descendants of Eve. Now, the Almighty's own words being pleaded to this, we must expect to find that it actually happens, and we do. For Jesus Christ himself, he tells us of it in the New Testament. But this is denied and rejected and disregarded and misunderstood by the religious world, as in Matthew 13, 38 and 39, explaining the parable of the tares among the wheat. Jesus said, now wait a minute, did I say that? Matthew 13th chapter, verses 38 and 39, and it goes like this: "The field is the world, and the good seeds are the children of the kingdom. But the tares are the children of the wicked one, and the enemy that sowed them is the devil." You see, my friends, he was trying to tell you, the very same people that named this place Mars Hill, and to their evil king, or god, their ruler, Baal, Cain, the great Khan that came here, that established and took over and ruled this world, who put it in the very hearts and established through Mahabharati his laws that were not as fair as the laws of Moses. They were cruel, barbaric laws. Go get them and get a comparison of them. So here, in essence, it's trying to tell you from the very beginning, those who their own world was destroyed in this great battle, as the Greeks say, the god of war, the red planet, Mars. Now let's go again in John 6, verse 70 and 71. Jesus had been talking with his 12 disciples, and we read, "And Jesus answered them, Have I not chosen you 12? And one of you is a devil." He speaks of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, for it was that he should betray him, being one of the 12. And again, you should read carefully as you look to the 8th chapter of St. John. "And Jesus told those who hated him, You are of your father the devil, and the lusts of your father you will do. He wasn't being vulgar or abusive in either of these cases, for he never resorted to name-calling for abuse. He did call some of them hypocrites, which truly they were, so his statement was precise and accurate. But, my friends, he knew that they were the sons of Edom, meaning reds. There's got to be a tie-in. Mars Hill, the red planet. Think about that. He did call some of them serpents and the children of vipers, which again was accurate, because we explained to you what the great viper ships, and we quoted to you from the old Chinese there that he talked about these ancient people that in ancient times, around 200 A.D., when a lot of this knowledge seemed to be rising to the surface all over this world, and parallel accounts from India to China that parallel our Bible, it seems to be irrefutable. And it talks about the dragon ships they call the yin and yang ships, the great black ships of the dragon. In other words, the fiery dragon, which was a serpent that breathed fire, and I think we already covered this in the other tapes. So he wasn't saying you're just a low-down snake. See, the Almighty made snakes. And nature out here, they're part of the balance of nature, or would be covered up with rats. And he has to put different snakes in to combat snakes, or would be covered up with poisonous snakes. And so this is why we have black snakes and gopher snakes, and why we have king snakes. Well, so much for the snakes. Now, long before this, they had adopted, as we pointed out to you, the serpent. It was a symbol of Satan. This is why their tradition had been given the word Nakash, the translated serpent, which really means enchanter. I will never, ever forget Walt Disney's The Jungle Book. I believe I was a little boy when I saw that. And this little boy came upon, I may be wrong, so forgive me, it was something like a Shere Khan. See, as I've pointed out, there is irrefutable evidence beyond the shadow of a doubt that Sargon the Great, Sargon the Magnificent, as I've pointed out, a book written back at the turn of the century by Mrs. Sidney Bristow, who wrote the book Sargon the Magnificent. But this little boy was in the jungle. Here was this large anaconda-type snake come down, and the little boy was in a state of shock when he saw him, and he was trying to escape. But then this snake was like an enchanter. He was hypnotic, and he would say, "You're such a nice little boy." But I have a young friend. Well, he's not so young anymore. He's getting old like me. And he said that the people are lulled to sleep by the whispering of the serpent. We believe their lies. We do not question it. We don't look about us. We don't think. So we understand the serpent was a symbol of Satan. This is why their tradition is given the word Nakash, the translation serpent, which it really means, as I said before, enchanter. Jesus, therefore, was telling them that they were of their father, the devil, or serpent, if they preferred that word. And in this, he was simply stating a biological fact with scientific precision and identifying the personage of their ancestors and those who took place in that great war, mistranslated, misunderstood as the flood in the pre-Diluvian days, which brought about all of this chaos, that these were truly the sons of the evil watchers who had been good watchers, but they had gone awry. They had turned against God. That's why they were called Satan and the children of Satan, those who committed treason in the heavens and outer space against the Almighty and turned upon the very throne of God, as we pointed out and proved in other tapes, literally tried to destroy his spaceship, so to speak, or his great satellite out there, thinking that somehow you can destroy the Almighty. Now, He was simply stating a biological fact with scientific precision, identifying the personage and their descendants and their ancestors. People say, my, that sounds anti-Semitic. No, my friends, this is not anti-Semitic, because the Old Testament, the New Testament, it's about Adamites. It's about Hebrews, same people. It's about Israelites, same people. It's about people of Judah, same people. But all you got to do is look at Revelations 2:9 and Revelations 3:9. I know thy works and thy tribulation, thy poverty, and I know the blasphemy of those Jews who claim they're Jews and are not, but are of the synagogues of Satan. Now, if you don't like that, you take that up with Jesus Christ. I'm trying to defend the true Israel, and I'm trying to point out the fact that there was those evil people in the times of Jesus Christ who had, all you got to do, go read the book of John, read through your New Testament, and he says, you have taken over, you've usurped the seat of Moses, and they were teaching this false Babylonian religion. Now, when everyone or anyone ever tells you that the Bible is in conflict with modern science, has proved true, don't you believe it. The things that most preachers teach are in conflict with scientific truth. As we all go back to the Bible, not to any man-made doctrine, and double-check it for accuracy of translation, you'll find that the Bible really says in its original language is accurate and precise, and our scientists, in many cases, they have yet to achieve it or to understand it. You know, my friends, it's like so many other things that we assume. We just assume that we know these things because we've heard it parroted over and over and driven into our conscious and subconscious mind. And so in the light of new truth, we start to bray like a jackass in a pepper patch, and we get all huffy and swell up like a poison pup. We're ready to fight to the death for that which we think we believe. And like people say, well, everybody knows that Columbus discovered America. Well, my dear friends, he did not. Your ancient Mongolian and Asiatic types, they discovered it hundreds of years, even prior to Leif Erikson, who was, approximately 500 years before Columbus. And so when we find that we go back, you'll find a lot of these flood stories and the Bible legend that was told to the conquistadores by the Indians may have come from some ancient Buddhist-type teachings that the source of Zapotec, Z-A-P-O-T-E-C, Mayan and Aztec calendar was actually Oriental. That the source of the early Mexican writings were Oriental. The source of both Peru and Mexico of the Mongolian spot and the Epicanath eye fold can be attributed to the ancient Chinese explorers. Now I'm quoting from Gods from the Far East. This was by Henrietta Mertz. Now, there's a lot of very interesting evidence here that the root of the earliest Mexican religious philosophy, the dual principle, they seem to think that it stems from the Chinese yin and yang. The positive and the negative theory, which came from or so she claims, came from the earliest Chinese explorers more than 4,000 years ago. And yes, I've believed this also, and I've seen the different types of Asiatic, Mongolian-faced Indians up in the Alaska and through the Aleutians and the North Pole. These different Eskimos, they came down across the Bering Straits and they spread all over this world. But you see, even in Christianity, we see a duality, the positive and the negative, the good and the evil force. And it seems like the Almighty has to keep a lot of the evil on hand to keep His righteous righteous. Well, remember this scripture, my friend, the basic little thing you learned in Sunday school you never understood. Nothing can happen outside of God's will. Nothing can and nothing will And all things work together for the good of those who are called according to his purpose. It says praise him for all things. No, it says praise him in all things. Just like Jonah when he was sinking under the waves. But we find as we go back and we check some more evidence here of these ancient peoples that I say they wandered from the stars and they were cast onto this earth ages and eons ago. That the Folsom Point and the Cochinal constituted a reverse borrowing by the Chinese on the American continent. The magnetic personality was who dominated the scene and furnished the incentive as well as the motive power that stimulated these aboriginal people into rising to such unprecedented heights, the likes of which rarely have been duplicated. In all probability, were most likely who Shan, the 5th century Buddhist priest. And for the Asiatic side, is my belief that the great luminous canyon of Chinese literature actually was the Grand Canyon of the Colorado in Arizona. That the Chinese archer legend originated in our Grand Canyon. That the description given here of the Shanghai King fits actual photographic locations in the United States, Canada, and Mexico can be identified and mapped. The Chinese were in America in a period of at least as early as 2200 BC and came periodically up to a date as late as 500 AD, preceding, as I said, Leif Erikson by more than possibly 3,000 years. We find in the Chinese classics of mountains and seas, which are the past 2,000 years, has been accepted by the Chinese only in myth. Is no myth, but is actually true. There are 2 documents faithfully preserved within the archives of China that furnishes sufficient written proof that up to now has been lacking of Chinese exploration in America as dates as early 2200 BC. And then we find that there's a lot of remaining untranslated books that went back to the Shanghai King, contains identifiable geographic locations on the face of the earth outside of China which can be traced and mapped. So you see, were they not the sons of the Watchers? Were they the pre-Adamic people? Did they not, like they say themselves in their own evidence and their own history and their own archaeology and their records, that they were the wood of the trees of the heavens? But then this damnable Lenin and this communism came along and destroyed their beautiful history and their culture and the knowledge which we co-participated in and shared in. And if we could have known for sure who they are, from whence they came, and what relationship they had with us, then we could better know who we are, whether we're black, white, yellow, red, white. So you see, my dear friends, there are yet a lot of mysteries to be uncovered, and we shall continue to do so and try to do. And we appreciate you listening, and we'd like to hear from you and hear your comments. And those of you who have gone this far with us, thank you so much, and we appreciate you. And I want you to know that what money is derived from these tapes and other literature, it goes into advertising and to spread the word. And as a lot of you know, I send out free tapes all over this world. And naturally, hopefully, that they will buy something. Because, my friends, this world, I think that everybody knows by now, it's going down the toilet. And a marvelous thing I would leave you to think about. Go back and read the 12th chapter of Daniel. Please, friends, for your sake. Those who have brought many to righteousness. And that day you will shine like the luminaries of heaven, like the stars, like the moon, and like the sun. It says all glories, in other words, all positions, and the kingdom and the perpetual government of your great outer space Lord and Father is not all the same. But there's a position and a space open for you, and you shall be raised to immortality. Not in a spook form. You're going to get your body back. Christ ate fish with his. He walked through walls. He went into heaven, back to space in a perfect body. Said we'd be like him. Remember your body, your soul, and spirit. They may destroy your body. They may destroy your soul. But they cannot destroy the energy that constitutes your spirit. It's impossible to destroy. So work, for the night is coming. He said he'll give you a white stone. What did he mean by that? You who overcome this world. I don't care about whether you think you're going to lose your job or this. Sure, they're important in our temporal, but the worst thing you could lose is an eternal house, an eternal place beside the Almighty. So I think those of you who have gone this far, you're either the adversary who's listening and worried about this, or you must be one of those, what he spoke of, I'll take one of a town and two of a family. You must be a very special chosen, who has been given eyes to see and ears to hear, who can catch a glimpse of the kingdom, his eternal government that is without end. And regardless what the preachers and the teachers say, he said heaven and earth would pass away before his law. And remember, whosoever teaches error according to the law shall be called the least in the kingdom of the Almighty. So thank you for listening, and may the Almighty bless you and guide you and direct you, and thank you so much for listening, and be sure and write me. Noah Fredericks or Pilgrim Ships, P.O. Box 1086, Lakeview, Missouri 65737. Thank you so much for listening.